apps, or, but even so, you're doing an acting gig for the CIA. Who calls you for that?
Yeah.
You ever get one of those calls?
No.
No, I never got one of those calls.
And my agent never hit me with that one.
I believe Erika Kirk was fully aware of and helped facilitate the plot to kill her husband. We're going to start by breaking down an interview that she did just 8 days after his death.
Why doesn't anybody know anything about Charlie Kirk's parents? I just saw a video about this, and it had literally never occurred to me that no one is talking about. We have not heard from or seen footage of anybody other than Erika and the freaking vice president and Usha.
Joe Rogan just dropped something that has completely and permanently shifted how seriously people are taking the Charlie Kirk situation. And what he said is not the kind of commentary that fades quietly into the background after a news cycle or two. According to Rogan, what has been unfolding around Erika Kirk and Charlie's family does not look anything like a random chain of unfortunate and poorly timed events. It looks mapped out. It looks like something constructed with enough precision to pass as coincidence to anyone not paying sufficiently close attention. And that specific quality is exactly what is generating deep and sustained unease among the people who have been watching every development carefully. But the detail that really sent the online conversation into a completely different gear was not just the general suggestion of deliberate planning. Rogan reportedly walked through the specific timing of key events, pointing out how certain significant moves appeared to happen at the precise moment when Charlie's sister was reportedly preparing to come forward and speak publicly about what she knew. That timing did not feel accidental to anyone who heard Rogan articulate it clearly, because people who have observed political situations of this nature understand exactly what it means when someone positioned close to a major public figure goes completely and suddenly silent at the exact moment they were expected to speak. The internet does not process that kind of timing as coincidence. It processes it as a signal. And when Rogan began suggesting there may have been a deliberate and targeted effort to shut that voice down before it could reach the public.
Relation of her making crazy eyes.
No.
There's a video of her making demon eyes, and every time she makes the eyes, the music. It's so ridiculous.
She's possessed.
The entire conversation shifted from speculation into something considerably more focused, considerably more organized, and considerably more serious. Joe Rogan had been watching everything connected to Erika Kirk and the circumstances surrounding Charlie's death for an extended period, observing carefully from a maintained distance without publicly committing to a specific position. Then he sat down with comedian Mark Normand for an episode that felt immediately and distinctly different in its energy, like two people who had made a shared decision they were no longer willing to stay safely non-committal. Mark called Erika a psycho without any hedging or diplomatic framing whatsoever, going straight into the rumors surrounding her alleged intelligence community connections and making clear he believed there were significant layers to this situation that had not yet surfaced publicly. He did not sound like someone speculating tentatively from a position of uncertainty. He sounded like someone who had already reached a conclusion and was simply choosing this specific moment to say it out loud. Then Joe zeroed in on the viral compilation that had already been circulating extensively, the footage showing Erika doing that specific and deeply unusual thing with her eyes during recorded interviews. Joe called it demonic, and the specific way he delivered that word suggested he was consciously restraining himself from going considerably further, aware that saying too much too directly invites the kind of organized response that comes from people with resources and connections who prefer certain conversations to remain contained. When that episode dropped, the reaction from listeners was immediate and overwhelming. People described it as someone finally saying publicly what enormous numbers of them had been processing privately for months without a platform large enough to make it matter.
The same day this information came out. Now, if you remember, Sheriff Nate Brooksby's friend, a retired deputy, called him with a shaky voice saying that he knew who killed Charlie Kirk.
The eye behavior itself continues generating its own sustained and organized wave of analysis. Nobody from Erika's camp has produced a clear and convincing explanation for what people are observing in those clips. The theories being advanced span a wide spectrum: a nervous physiological reflex under sustained camera pressure, a deliberate affectation designed to create a specific and calculated visual impression, performance training that produced counterproductive instincts, or something that observers with knowledge of psychological conditioning describe in considerably more unsettling terms. Every single theory stays active because none of them have been eliminated by any honest and direct public response from the people who would have the most obvious motivation to eliminate them, and footage that generates this volume of sustained replay and frame-by-frame examination does not fade. It builds audience and accumulates momentum with every week that passes without satisfying explanation. But the eye behavior was not even the element of Rogan's commentary that landed with the most lasting and most consequential impact. What genuinely cut through everything else and permanently altered how a significant portion of the audience was processing this entire situation was what he said about Erika's alleged connections to the intelligence community. That specific angle gave documented weight and mainstream credibility to a theory that had been building in research circles for months. The idea that Erika's presence in Charlie's life was not romantic coincidence, but deliberate and operational placement, and that certain people getting close to verifying that theory may have been systematically and deliberately silenced before they could bring their findings into any kind of public accountability. Before going deeper into the intelligence angle, there is a layer of this story that has been building its own independent momentum: the documented and increasingly visible deterioration of Erika's relationship with Charlie's actual family. In the immediate aftermath of Charlie's death, the natural and expected human response would have been for his wife to lean into his family, draw support from the people who shared his history, his childhood, and his blood, and work with them collaboratively to honor his memory. That is what genuine grief looks like when the relationships surrounding it are real.
We did what we usually did before tours. We said our prayer, and we asked the Lord to protect us, and we asked the Lord that His will be done. That's what we did.
At one time, an employee of Turning Point, she has been one of the main peddlers of these conspiracies, and she is making a huge amount of money on it. She is building her business. What do you want to say to her and the other people that are putting these lies out into the world right now?
Stop.
What people observed instead looked like the precise opposite: a deliberate and systematic separation, with Charlie's family being progressively pushed to the margins of everything connected to his name and his organization, while Erika consolidated control over all of it. People noticed the growing distance early and tried initially to extend the benefit of the doubt. Early grief creates natural withdrawal. Temporary disconnection is human and understandable. But as weeks became months and the separation deepened rather than resolved, the charitable interpretation became harder to sustain. Decisions were being made about Charlie's legacy, his organization, and the public presentation of his memory without meaningful involvement from the people who knew him longest and loved him most. That pattern does not reflect grief. It reflects control being exercised deliberately and with purpose. Then came the detail that shocked even people who had already been observing with deep skepticism. Reports that Charlie's parents, Robert and Catherine Kirk, were not simply absent from the memorial Erika organized. They were allegedly not invited. The people who raised Charlie Kirk and gave him everything that shaped who he was reportedly did not receive an invitation to the public event honoring their own son's life. When that claim circulated and was not refuted with any clarity or documented counter-evidence, the reaction was immediate and intense, because excluding a person's own parents from their memorial is not an oversight or administrative error. It is a deliberate choice that communicates something unmistakable about access and exclusion. After the memorial, Charlie's family essentially disappeared from public view, and that disappearance did not read as quiet private grieving to anyone who had been watching closely. It read as removal, as people being systematically pushed out of a space they had every right and every reason to occupy, both publicly and privately, by someone with the motivation and the means to make that removal happen without public confrontation. And then there is Mary Kirk, and her situation stands entirely apart from everything else in this story, in ways that make her sustained silence the single most significant unanswered question in the entire conversation. Mary is Charlie's sister, and she is the one member of his family who has maintained complete and unbroken public silence throughout this entire unfolding situation.
Because they came out and they were suddenly trying to gaslight us and were, well, the CIA didn't produce the documentary. Okay, yes, but the head of the CIA is in it. Okay, you gotta get approval from the CIA to be in a CIA documentary. That doesn't just happen casually. Like he says, are you getting that phone call from your agent? And no, she's not acting. She's specifically referring to her mother's business model, EMPs. So she's not acting.
No appearances, no statements, nothing on any platform that addresses any aspect of what happened to her brother or what has been unfolding since. Just absence, total and sustained. What is documented about Mary paints a picture of someone who would have every reason and every capacity to speak independently. She works as an art curator in Chicago, a professional life entirely removed from the conservative political ecosystem that might otherwise create institutional pressure towards silence. A blog post that circulated after Charlie's death included what was reported as Mary's tribute to her brother, saying he teased her, encouraged her, and carried a fire she admired, even when she disagreed. That language matters on multiple levels. It confirms a real and deep sibling relationship, acknowledges genuine disagreement, and reflects someone with their own distinct perspective and their own independent voice. Old resurfaced social media content showed Mary's political and social sensibilities running in a completely different direction from Charlie's. Support for Bernie Sanders, engagement with issues around public cultural funding and historical education, museum programming focused on underrepresented communities. That contrast between siblings is not inherently suspicious on its own, but it matters enormously in this specific context because it means Mary is not embedded in the conservative political circles that might create pressure or incentive for silence. She operates in an entirely different world. She has no obvious institutional reason to stay quiet, and yet she has maintained the most complete and unbroken silence of anyone connected to this situation.
Doing a CIA informational video.
Weird.
Like an acting gig, or is this something else?
Perhaps, or, but even so, you're doing an acting gig for the CIA. Who calls you for that?
Yeah.
You ever get one of those calls?
No.
No, I never got one of those calls.
And my agent never hit me with that one.
Before everything went completely quiet, there were active and credible reports that Mary was preparing to speak publicly, that she had specific and significant things to say about what was really happening behind the scenes, about what she knew regarding the circumstances of Charlie's death, and about what had been occurring inside his family and organization in the critical period preceding it. People were watching with genuine anticipation and specific expectation that something consequential was coming. And then, complete silence, immediate and sustained, with no explanation offered. That is exactly where Rogan's commentary about timing landed with its full and specific force. When he pointed out that certain significant moves appeared to coincide precisely with the moment Mary was expected to speak, he was providing language and framework to something enormous. Numbers of people had already noticed and found deeply troubling. That silence arriving at that exact moment, at the precise point of expected disclosure, does not carry the texture of personal choice made freely and independently. It carries the texture of intervention, of something or someone creating the conditions under which speaking became either impossible or far too dangerous. And the question that follows is one nobody connected to this situation has been willing to address directly. What happened to make Mary go silent at that specific and that critical moment? Back to the intelligence angle, because this is where every other thread in this story converges into its most serious and most consequential form. During the podcast, Rogan zeroed in on the viral video showing Erika appearing in what looked unmistakably like an official production connected to intelligence community promotional and informational materials. The clip had already generated significant attention before Rogan engaged with it, but his specific framing gave it entirely new weight and legitimacy among people who might otherwise have dismissed it. He asked directly how a model or actress ends up in a production environment with that specific institutional connection, and pointed out clearly that access to those environments does not happen through conventional and random casting processes. Those spaces have specific entry requirements reflecting specific background characteristics, existing connections, and prior vetting that most people never encounter, because most people are never considered for them. Erika's team attempted to neutralize the video by describing her involvement as straightforward acting work, nothing more significant than a standard performance credit on a production that happened to involve certain institutional contexts. But Candace Owens examined that specific explanation and found it fundamentally unconvincing. Candace pointed out that what Erika displayed in the footage did not look like someone delivering memorized lines with the slightly disconnected quality that performance work typically produces. She appeared natural, comfortable, and specifically knowledgeable, including a documented moment where she referenced her mother's reel business while discussing highly technical subjects including electromagnetic pulse attacks and power grid vulnerabilities. That level of specific technical fluency and that degree of natural comfort with intelligence community framing does not come from being handed a script. It comes from prior exposure, prior engagement, and prior familiarity with the material at a level that goes substantially beyond a single acting assignment. Once that specific observation began circulating widely, the video stopped being reasonably interpretable as a simple performance credit. People began watching it as documentation, as footage of someone operating in a space they genuinely and familiarly belonged to rather than temporarily visiting for a creative project. The confidence, the fluency, the specific technical detail, the institutional ease, all of it pointed toward background knowledge, an established connection that Erika has never publicly acknowledged, explained, or addressed directly. And when that observation gets placed alongside everything else accumulating simultaneously, the systematic distance from Charlie's family, the exclusion of his parents from their own son's memorial, the removal of internal voices raising questions, the reported attempts to pressure Joe Rogan, the complete disappearance of Mary Kirk at the exact moment of expected disclosure, the documented timeline anomalies, and the intelligence community production footage. The pieces stop looking like separate and unconnected elements of a complicated and sad situation. They start looking like components of a single and coherent picture that someone with resources and coordination has invested significant effort in keeping the public from fully assembling. The reported attempts to pressure Rogan after the episode aired added their own unmistakable and revealing signal. Reports emerged that Erika's team reached out with suggestions that Joe risked serious professional consequences if he continued pursuing this line of public discussion. Think carefully about what that response actually communicates. Joe Rogan is not a figure realistically vulnerable to pressure from someone in Erika Kirk's current public position. The confidence required to even attempt that kind of pressure on that specific target implies backing from people with considerably more institutional power and considerably more organizational reach than Erika has publicly demonstrated. And that implication, that someone with serious resources and serious connections is actively operating behind Erika's visible public positioning, is precisely what has driven speculation about who is really funding and protecting her into sustained and organized overdrive. One comment that captured the dominant online mood and circulated extensively read, "Erika Kirk was a CIA and intelligence honeypot and handler placed deliberately into Charlie Kirk's life." That is an extraordinary and serious claim. And it is being made not by fringe voices operating in isolated and disconnected spaces, but by people who have spent significant time examining documented evidence and finding that conventional explanations keep failing to account for the full observable pattern. The distance between that specific theory and the official narrative of a conservative political couple built on organic romance and shared faith has never been wider. And with every new development that the official narrative fails to adequately explain, that distance grows more visible and more significant. Rogan's central question, was Erika simply an ambitious woman who found her way into Charlie's orbit through pageants and networking, or was she deliberately and specifically placed in his path for a purpose that had nothing to do with romance or shared values, is not going away. It sits at the absolute center of everything being examined and everything being debated. Because the answer to that question does not simply reframe Erika's personal story. It reframes Charlie's entire life, his death, the fate of everything he built, and what has been happening to his family and his organization ever since. And until that question receives an honest and independently verifiable answer, the people who have been watching, documenting, and connecting every available piece of evidence are absolutely not going to stop asking it. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, subscribe, and stay completely locked in, because this story is not finished, and the next development may be the one that changes everything.